The views and opinions expressed in the following program are those of the hosts and guests, and not necessarily those of the staff or management of Worldwide Digital Broadcasting Corporation.
Knowledge is power, and this is powerful stuff. Wellness Education Cannabis Advocates of Nevada present the We Can 702 Nevada Cannabis News Hour with the We Can radio team. For the next 60 minutes, we'll take an in-depth look at the cannabis reform revolution sweeping the nation. Now, let's fire up the news hour. Here is the We Can radio team.
Good afternoon and welcome to the Nevada Cannabis News Hour. This is your host, Michael McAuliffe, with Perry Heichu, our co-host here in the studio with me, and our other co-host, Kurt Duhatsch, is off today. So, boy, there's a lot going on. It's amazing. There's a real snowball effect in the entire cannabis regulation and the political arenas, and there are still great injustices out there, and so we're going to talk about them. But there's some local news first that we'll talk about, and Perry, you were saying you saw this a day or two ago from the Department of Public and Behavioral Health.
I think most patients in the state of Nevada will appreciate this change that the department has made. Apparently, the last day that patients will be able to visit the Department of Motor Vehicles to get their medical marijuana card is Thursday, August 11th of this year. Beginning on Friday, August 12th, the DMV will no longer process medical marijuana cards in person. The new procedure will mail cards directly to patients, eliminating the need to apply in person. Patients with letters of approval who have not yet visited the DMV may visit the DMV before Friday or simply wait for their card to arrive in the mail. Letters of approval may be used to purchase medicine in dispensaries for 60 days from the letter's date of issuance. Now, patients have been complaining about this for years. We have to go to the DMV. People think it's invasive, intrusive. There has been this miscommunication among people for a long time that the driver's licenses are in fact your medical marijuana card, and those records are linked. I think this is a negative for me personally, because I used to utilize my privileged status as a medical marijuana patient. Well, let me back up. When you went in for your medical marijuana card in the state of Nevada, they would automatically put you in the handicap line due to, I believe, the way the language was written unintentionally. And I used to take that opportunity to do my registration or whatever kind of other DMV business I had, and I was in and out of the DMV within half an hour, 45 minutes every single time. This eliminates that convenience for me, but I believe most patients will find it positive. Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, be gaining the system, I know, but still, it is a good thing for most patients who, or especially the critically ill people who don't have the opportunity or the ability or the financial means to get to the DMV and take the time out of their day, or people who are very busy, have full-time jobs. It's a pain in the butt spending just another day out of your life and jumping through another hoop to get your card. So
I agree. It's another common sense reform that should have happened years and years ago, but we're glad it's out there now. It's amazing how slowly the state, and I don't just mean the state of Nevada, but how slowly government on a federal, state, or local level moves on this. It's as if they're afraid they're stepping into quicksand, when really they're just comporting with the wishes of most of their constituents. And as far as this particular story goes, yeah, it absolutely makes sense not to have to go down to the DMV. What they do is they use your driver's license picture or your non-driver's license ID picture. Now, I guess if you've just recently moved into the state and you don't have a picture on file with the DMV, that you're probably still going to have to go down there.
Well, yeah, you have to get the driver's license or re-register your car within 30 days, supposedly, of moving here anyway, so.
Yeah, we know everybody listens to that.
Right.
But the thing is that once they do have you on record, that's a good time-saving step. Now, over the past several years, a number of activists have testified to the legislature and spoken to the various politicians, saying if you have a long-term chronic condition, if you have MS, it's not going away. If you have Parkinson's, if you have cachexia, any glaucoma, any number of things, that these aren't going away. And so why should you have to go through this whole process every year, including, up till now going to the DMV, when you really, the state could make it more like a driver's license and have you renew once every 4 years.
So should this be a blanket policy for all medical card holders, or should we create a subsection, a subclass what, terminally ill or critically ill people who would qualify for these cards? Because I guess some people would come back and say, well, if they're critically ill, then they might not be here in a couple of years to renew them anyway. So why would we grant them this privilege?
Generally, medical cannabis patients are there for chronic illness, long-term illness, not the acute injury, you know, a traumatic injury or something like that, that they're going to be over and done with in 3 months or something like that. So most of the patients who get on this program will remain on the program for multiple years. And, you know, you could make a case for saying, well, if your reason for getting on the program and on your doctor's note and everything says that this is a temporary condition, then it should be revisited in a year. But in the vast majority of cases, and it's not hard for the legislature to insert a few lines in 453A about this, but that if you have a long-term condition, then the state should help you with a long-term solution and not unduly burden you with having to go to the doctor and refile with the state. And I mean, they're moving in the right direction with this, with the DMV, and not requiring you to go down every year. But there's a lot more that they can do in this area.
It seems like these various entities and agencies that are tasked with regulating this industry have a lot more power than I anticipated outside of the legislative language that has been given. I thought that we were kind of tied into a lot of this and that we had to wait every 2 years to change a lot of this, but a lot of these regulations that I thought were set in stone have been flexing a lot. The California card recommendation by the Attorney General, this change by the Department of Motor Vehicles. I'm not sure if it was the DMV or the Department of Behavioral Health and Human Services that made this change, but it just seems like a lot of very major changes. It is the division, I guess.
Yes, the division is setting all the policy on this. And you're absolutely right that most people think, well, you put it in the law and that's it. Well, in 2000, we voted the medical cannabis law into the state constitution, and you know, the state legislature did the bare minimum that they could the next year,
later,
and then ignored it for another dozen years. And so it's a case where the legislature puts things out in broad brushstrokes. They're going to say, well, you should do this, you should do that, but they have the minutiae of all of these details and regulatory nuance to be enacted by whatever regulatory agency it is. In this case, health, the division. But that's not untypical of the way that laws are crafted.
Where do those powers and the legislative authority begins? Can they technically change whatever they feel like?
Well, if you look at this program and this division in specific, they will say, well, we're not going to go one step over the line of what the legislature allowed us to do, what they put in statute. But because it was broad brushstrokes, there's a lot of room for them to maneuver and determine, well, we think this is what they meant, we think that's what they meant. And even in the face of legislative intent, where you'll have somebody like Senator Segerblum saying, oh, well, this is what we meant to do, the division is not compelled to follow that.
Right.
It's the division technically operates under the executive branch, so they're operating under the auspices of the governor's office, and that's a co-equal branch of government, and so they have an awful lot of authority to make determinations. Now then, the problem arises if they do something and you or I or a patient out there says, no, this isn't right. You go to the third branch of government, the judiciary, to determine whether the division went too far,
if it's legal
or not, if it's constitutional. And so that's just the way that our entire system has been set up. And so there's nothing wrong with that per se, but we all know who are interested in this topic that the regulators in the executive branch are much more conservative, and even the lawmakers are much more conservative about this issue than the American people are.
No doubt, much more conservative than the public polling would would showcase.
Absolutely. And so, you know,
Do you think this is just a common thing of people fear what they don't understand, and a lot of these older lawmakers either were not very well exposed to cannabis or had maybe negative exposure to cannabis through the, you know, like people throwing rocks at the soldiers when they were coming home, or like they associate the hippie movement with the cannabis movement, or liken it to it, or like, you know, something to that effect, or like, I'm not exactly sure where all this, I don't want to say animosity, but maybe overcautious nature.
Well, animosity
is coming from.
a good word for it, actually, because a lot of these people, especially as you say, the older generation of politicos, have been brought up through 70 years of reefer madness propaganda, and so they believe they're educated, and they believe that they know the truth on this. And unfortunately for them, the science does not agree with that, and it's a case where propaganda is very effective on so many people. You know, Mussolini demonstrated this in Italy in the 1930s, Hitler in the 1940s, Stalin. You know, we saw in our own country throughout the late 30s and into the middle of the 40s with World War II. The official portraiture of Japanese soldiers was, you know, of monkey-like people with, you know, thick glasses on and you know, protruding buck teeth, and this was just it was not true, but it was just
that
the
stereotype
picture that was painted, a stereotype.
Yeah.
And cannabis has definitely been victim to multiple stereotypes over the years, and you know, unfortunately, most of them negative, because the people who are doing that stereotyping and putting out that propaganda make money from prohibition.
Right.
And you've got those people in power making political contributions, and they get themselves appointed to this agency or that representative for an executive, and all of a sudden they're speaking like they're a complete expert on this, and the odds are none of them ever tried it, and you know, they have no idea, and it's unfortunate, but it's the system we're working in. So we were talking just before we came on air about Bernie Sanders not getting the Democratic nomination, and the fact that he's got something like 126 of his followers now running for office, and I think that's where the change comes in, and we need to see people here in Nevada running for this part-time legislature that we have, and you know, not be one-trick ponies, not be totally focused on this issue, but be sensitive and sensible about this issue, because the vast majority of Nevadans support it. And I've been telling politicians for years, it's a political vote getter. It's not a vote repulsor, and they just have a hard time getting through that.
It is. When I was younger, and I used to tell people that I, you know, was a cannabis consumer, or that I wanted to get into marijuana consulting or things like that, people were really, you know, hesitant to take my card or, you know, have any serious conversation. But these days, as soon as my card comes out, or say, oh, I'm a marijuana consultant or activist, oh man, it's an icebreaker. Everyone wants to talk about it. Oh, my friend or my family member or this or that. It's always this. It seems like everyone has developed a story recently about how marijuana has influenced their life for the positive, rather than, oh, you know, I hate the dopers, I hate the dope, and I hate the doper narrative that we used to get when we put ourselves out there. Of course, in some professional circles, we still do get that. I have reason to believe that I was denied for a loan because of what was on my answering machine once. I missed a call from a loan officer, and they didn't give any reason to deny. It's a long story, but you know, I believe there are still negative stereotypes, especially in the financial world.
There absolutely are.
That we have to break down, and I'm not exactly sure how to get that.
An MME license holder here in the state of Nevada, who somebody just decided they wanted to, you know, get even or get back at him or something like that, and they called up their bank, which was Chase Manhattan, and said, oh, do you know that this person is involved in the medical marijuana business? And without any investigation, Chase Manhattan closed the 4 banking accounts that this person had with them, and cut $80,000 line of credit that they had, just because
hearsay.
Hearsay. but just because of the fact, really, that this person was involved in a legal business, had gone through all sorts of vetting by the state and the county, and yet because of the federal government and the prohibition, Chase said, "Yep, we're closing you down." Fortunately, that is an outlier. I haven't heard of anybody else who's had that happen. But you know, if it happens to you, it's pretty damned inconvenient.
It is what it is. We'll try to chew through it.
You know, you're talking about mainstream, going mainstream with this, and I think we've got another story here about runners and athletes. In the past few weeks, we've talked more about people in football who've been coming out and
there's a lot of
mostly.
Athletes who are starting to kind of break the what do we say, come out of the cannabis closet, either active or formerly active athletes, you know, both professional in a, I guess we would call it club level, and in an Olympic level also. I read a blurb on the internet the other day that said the World Athletic Doping Association recently has allowed Olympians to consume marijuana for the first time, reversing their policy. They said, as long as you don't consume on the day of competition, we're not going to hammer you for it. And that's a big retraction from them stripping people of gold. You know, I believe there was a Canadian snowboarder who had his gold medal stripped from him back in the late 80s or early 90s because of cannabis use. I mean, people have literally their athletic lives ruined by that. And it's nice to see that at least they have taken that stance to understand it's not such a serious infraction. It doesn't harm the integrity of the sport to allow people to help them recover after the fact.
And even more recently than that, you have Olympians like Michael Phelps, the swimmer, who lost a number of endorsement deals after a photograph of him, you know, hitting on a bong was widely circulated. And you know, I just don't understand it, because all this swimmer was doing was trying to take that deep hit and increase his lung capacity for when he was swimming.
Do you remember? Do you believe that this comeback of his has anything to do with his it's kind of like a personal quest for redemption kind of thing? Like, I don't want to say like there's nothing else for Olympic swimmers to do after the Olympics, but I don't know where he was supposed to go, and the way he went out, not like he did go out on top.
Deals.
Yeah,
that's where the money is.
Yeah, he wants to come back. I mean, I believe that since his that incident with the bong, all these states have gone recreationally legal. The tone has softened on marijuana significantly, and maybe he's looking to pick some of that back up and try to get back into the public, not necessarily talking about marijuana, but try to reclaim his prowess among being an endorsed athlete. You know what I mean?
To make a living from that. Well, you know, it's not only swimmers and footballers, but there's a piece in alternate.org by April Short, and she's showing that more athletes are coming out publicly, and that that what we have now is a Runner's World article from last February detailing the many reasons runners are mixing marijuana and mileage, and the subject has been a source of major debate in running circles. And you have we've got 3 runners here who, and I don't follow the sport, so I don't really know who these people are, but it's good when anybody is courageous enough to come out and tell a story that might have blowback against them. And so one of them, Avery Collins, lives in Colorado, which of course was one of the first states to legalize in 2012. And he told Leafly that he used marijuana socially during college, but started using it as a professional training tool after moving to Breckenridge, Colorado. His training regimen consists of 5-week blocks of really heavy-duty workouts. He says he's running 150 miles a week, you know, and averaging anywhere from 25 to 30 miles a day, and 30K to 40K feet in elevation climbing a week, going up and down the hills. And he says he uses cannabis to help his body repair the wear and tear of intense training periods. To run 100 straight miles, he says, like the race I'm doing this Friday, I could be out running for 28 straight hours. That just amazes me. And he says once you stop, you sit down, and it's crazy. Your body has been so used to running for over a day that it still thinks it's still going. So your muscles just throb, and all of a sudden it all stops and everything swells up. With its various medical components, you can actually cut down not only on the fatigue, but you can calm the muscles and shoot down a lot of that inflammation.
I was just going to say that the inflammation factor might be something significant in that and that repair process. That's very interesting. We've interviewed the 420 runner here on this show, and he swore up and down that medical cannabis helps him perform at a higher level. I mean, I don't know if it gives people a competitive advantage or whatever, but if it works for you, it works for you. It's as simple as that.
I think there's a difference between competitive advantage and recovering and repairing and rebuilding your body after these events. High Times quoted another runner, Jen Shelton, as saying the person who is going to win an ultra marathon is someone who can manage their pain, not puke, and stay calm. A pot does all three of those things. And so, you know, that counter argument can be made that, oh, she's using it and it's helping her, giving her advantage that others don't have. But if they're not using it before the race, if they're using it afterwards to manage pain, how is that different from using NSAIDs or other anti-inflammatories or anything else?
It technically isn't. That's very, very interesting, though, what Miss Shelton here is saying about how it might actually, if used properly during the, I mean, that just seems crazy to me. You know, I used to be an athlete when I was younger, and I would perform better when I was not under the influence, for sure, just because there was a lot of thinking going on. Like, I was a soccer player, there was always a lot of you know what I mean?
But there, and not to disparage it at all, but I think there's not as much of that thinking necessary when you're out doing long distance running, and not to belittle it at all. I'm sure there's strategy involved, but but really it's, you know, you've got your body and you are just working it like a machine. And a third ultramarathoner, Jeff Sperber, used to use a vaporizer to inhale some cannabis post-race, according to a Runner's World article. And he says, when you've been running for that long, you've got swelling in muscles and aching joints and you're tired, you can take an Advil, which will help the swelling and inflammation, but also that's very taxing on your liver. He says, I can't do stuff and function as a normal being, referring to the side effects of pharmaceutical pain meds, opioids. As a weed smoker, I can function. And so, you know, and this is a guy who's undergone 2 hip surgeries and a hernia surgery, and he's already got stage 4 arthritis in one of his toes, and he's a competitive runner. And so, you know, obviously cannabis anti-inflammatory properties are scientifically proven. And, you know, so it's just a case where if these people can use this to help reduce their pain and that makes them better athletes, that's not an unfair competition.
It's not. And a lot of these people, these professional athletes, this is not a hobby for them. This isn't something they do kind of on the side and, oh, you know, this is just what I do on the weekends. Like, this is their whole world. This is what a lot of these people do for a living. They seek endorsements from this. They seek to build their public profile from this. They want to be somebody. And for cannabis to be it just circles back to another argument we always make. It's hard for people to be gainfully employed no matter what sort of employment you choose, whether it be in a professional capacity or even an athletic capacity. If you consume cannabis, that livelihood is potentially threatened. I hear it. That is the #1 thing that I hear as a cannabis consultant. When I go out into the world, I'm sitting at a bar or something and someone asks me what I'm up to. That's the law they want changed. They want to be able to go to work. And we're going to have to deal with that eventually.
We understand that if, you know, if you're a commercial truck driver, if you're an airline pilot, if you're in a number of positions, that, no, we don't want these people to have consumed either alcohol or cannabis or anything else, you know, before going to work.
Of course not. Just like, yeah, exactly. That's the whole thing. When I'm at the airports a lot, you know, there was an old joke, you know, if you find a bar, you'll find a pilot at it. You know, and it's just like, that's, no one really bats an eye at that. I was at a drag strip in Palmer, Alaska a while ago, and there's a nice 2-story bar restaurant sitting right by the drag strip track. You see a lot of the guys between races and they're having a beer. Does anyone bat an eye? Of course not.
Right.
But with cannabis, oh, hey now, you know, you dopers aren't allowed to touch anything if you've had any kind of cannabis in your system. And this goes back to the intoxication, or excuse me, the impairment versus having it in your system at all argument, or the de facto limit argument that we need to once again address later on. But once again, we'll circle back to that another time. But like, long story longer, man, I'm just happy to see some of these people coming out and trying to show some love to the industry and try to kind of hopefully draw some other high-profile people out. The more high-profile athletes we can draw out, the better argument we can make to the who makes these policies? Like the major organizations, like Major League Baseball, National Football League, you know, NASCAR, people like that. I don't know NASCAR, but
the International Olympics Committee.
Yeah,
and
people like that. They are the ones who will push the policies to maybe like the state athletic commissions. If the Nevada State Athletic Commission is having hesitation or something, and they see these international bodies loosening up on it, you know, it does nothing but good for their for everyone. So.
Yep. So I think that this is a positive move forward. And, you know, you were mentioning alcohol, that, you know, over the past few years, people, as legalization initiatives have been moving around the country and been largely successful, one of the prohibitionist lines is that, well, you know, pot's bad for you, and then we of course say, well, look at alcohol, that's really bad for you. And they say, well, yes, but we have a tradition of alcohol use in this country, and so we can't prohibit alcohol. We tried that and it failed, but for some reason we think we can prohibit pot, and you know, even though there's a tradition of use of cannabis that goes back well before the founding.
Yeah, I'm not even going to get into the tradition, because that's not the argument I hear. The argument I hear is, well, we don't want just another intoxicating narcotic on the streets. Why would we go ahead and just legalize another bad thing? Because
beer and wine, alcohol prohibition or alcohol availability versus cannabis availability, they're like two ends of a long balloon. And if you squeeze one, end, you're going to have increases on the other end. So the more you tighten down on pot, the more people are going to use beer and wine or whatever. And if you restrict that prohibition, there will be people using less alcohol, which is undoubtedly a harsher substance and more dangerous on the body. So the people who make these arguments, oh, we don't want another substance, and even when they call cannabis a narcotic substance, it is not narcotic in any way. It is a less dangerous, much safer alternative than alcohol, and it just, these people don't want to see this. And in my opinion, because they have a vested financial interest in that. Of course.
I read a thing from the Republicans Against Marijuana Prohibition blog the other day that was talking about how that Kennedy-backed Project Sam has come to all of these western states. They have about $5 million to spend between the 5 western states that are trying to legalize cannabis either recreationally or medicinally to go forward. And, you know, that doesn't seem like a lot between all those states, but that's a lot of money to spend in less than 100 days now to the election. Yep. So, you know, it's like we had Mr. Bresny on a couple weeks ago, and it's like he said, we can't take our foot off the gas now. No. You know, you think you got it one bit far from it. Got to get out there and make sure that that you're registered to vote again.
That's one of the worst things, when you feel that your side has a lock on something. Oh, I don't need to go out and vote because I know we're going to win. You get enough people like that.
That's a classic athlete's mistake. How many times greatest strength you can give your enemy is if you underestimate them.
Yep. And with that, we're going to take a quick break and be right back.
Nevada Pure is a premier, vertically integrated medical marijuana enterprise which offers top-quality medical marijuana, great customer service, and a safe, private environment. We carry a wide selection of medical cannabis strains. Our knowledgeable staff will assist you in finding the correct strain for your condition. Our trained professional staff can educate you on various strains for your condition, methods of consumption, responsible cannabis use, and the wellness benefits of cannabis. We aim to help patients achieve a better quality of life. Medical marijuana is a medicine, not an intoxicant. It's about a patient's well-being at Nevada Pure. From the moment you make an appointment with us, your care, health, and well-being is our priority. Nevada Pure is located at 4360 Boulder Highway, Las Vegas, Nevada. Check out their entire menu at WWDBTV.com.
Attention medical marijuana patients. Do you know what your cannabis actually contains? Are there heavy metals, pesticides, or even mold? And what strength is it really? And is it really what you need? Well, the answers to these questions are simple. DigiPath Labs. DigiPath Labs is a Nevada state-approved medical marijuana testing facility whose scientists carefully test products for safety and potency, all within the state's rigorous mandate. You can buy with confidence and trust knowing DigiPath Labs has tested your medicine. If you're a licensed grower, dispenser, extractor, or edibles manufacturer in Nevada and want unparalleled customer service and consumer confidence, go to digipathlabs.com and find out what we can do for you. And as a patient, only go to dispensaries that carry the DigiPath Labs seal of approval. That's digipathlabs.com. DIGIPATH labs.com. or call us at 702-209-2429. That's 702-209-2429.
And welcome back to the Weekend Nevada Cannabis News Hour. This is your host, Mike McAuliffe, along with my co-host, Perry Heitschuh. And we've just been talking in the break, continuing our previous discussion about the insanity of this prohibition and its effects. Now, I know that I've heard it so many times where prohibitionists will say, oh, well, yes, it's good that we put people in jail for pot, but we only put serious people in jail. Nobody goes in for mere possession, and, really it's not set up that way, so we don't need to decriminalize
Absolute
anymore.
Nonsense.
And we have a couple of stories here, and the first one is from Oregon, by David Ferguson, writing at rawstory.com. And federal prosecutors announced that they're dropping charges against a 19-year-old Native American teenager who faced a year in prison for possessing a gram of marijuana. You can't get too much smaller than
mandatory
that.
sentencing, man. Gotta love it.
It's insane. The Oregon's Willamette Week was the newspaper that first broke this story and did the investigative reporting on it, which is so important. Without good journalism out there, we would be in much deeper shit than we are in this country. But anyway, so they spearheaded the investigation onto this, and an agreement filed in federal court just this past Thursday stipulates that if Thomas, this fellow, and his name is Devontre Thomas, if he obeys the law and holds down a job for 60 days, that federal misdemeanor drug possession charges against him will not be prosecuted. And the U.S. Attorney's Office confirmed that. Now, the thing that I have with the issue I take with this is one of the things he has to do is hold down a job. Now, as Bernie Sanders was saying throughout the campaign, minority youth unemployment is over 50% in this country. And especially when you look at Native Americans and their economic situation, very few of them actually have good opportunities to work at jobs. And I'm talking about more than just, sitting in a convenience store or something like that. So to make that a condition of his probation is much more a higher threshold to pass than it would be for you or I or most of our listeners.
I'm trying to see whether this kid lives on a reservation type thing or not, because I become aware that some of these reservations are not as wealthy as others, and that job opportunities within them are very, very...
The ones that don't have a casino, you mean?
Yeah, they're very... the job opportunities are, let's say, restricted, especially among the able-bodied youth. I'm concerned about the ability of this young man to find gainful employment, not only because of the potential marijuana already pre-existing in his system, but due to the economic circumstances surrounding him and his potential tribe, depending on where he is. Now, he was at a boarding school, Salem's Chemawa Indian School, a boarding school that's operated by the Bureau of Indian Education, which is an arm of the federal government.
Right, on federal land.
Now, that's disappointing. Kid just goes to school, ends up catching federal charges.
Yes.
Once again, we as cannabis consumers and patients need to be very, very aware of where our rights begin and end. If you're a Nevada patient and you go to the Valley of Fire, that is a state park, you'll be good to go there. If you happen to venture to Red Rock Canyon or the Lake Mead National Recreation Area, or possibly even the Toyobe National Forest, which encompasses Mount Charleston, those rights go away. If you encounter a law enforcement officer there, they may or may not, depending on what jurisdiction they fall into, if it's a metro officer or a ranger or something, they can choose, they'll choose to or not to enforce that federal law, and you might find yourself before a magistrate before you know it. And
we had a former Weekend board member who a couple of years ago was in this kind of situation in Utah, and they were in a federal park, and late at night there were 8 or 9 of them around a campfire, and they were passing a joint around, and a park ranger spied this former board member passing a joint to someone, and came over, and he didn't arrest him, but he wrote him up on federal misdemeanor charges, which is the same thing that's going here. And the difference is, we were talking before going on air a little bit about white privilege and the like, and I don't know how much I don't want to get into that, but our friend who was on the board was a white guy, and they gave him a ticket and he had to pay a fine, and that's all it was going to be. Whereas this young Native American boy was facing a year in jail, and they weren't joking about it. And so,
I've been arrested, detained, and imprisoned 3 different times for simple marijuana possession. It has nothing to do with race. It has to do with the individual arresting officer. How did their interactions with said person affect how they came into contact with you that day? Did they get laid that night? Where did they grow up? Etc. Yeah. There are all kinds of things that play into that. Are there certain sentencing guidelines that disproportionately affect people of different color? Well, as we like to say, the numbers don't lie, and it's really about as simple as that.
Yes, but whites and blacks and Latinos and Asians in this country use illicit substances at roughly about the same rate. But if you look at who's prosecuted, who's incarcerated, there are huge discrepancies. There are something on the order of 10 times, 9 times as many African Americans imprisoned for drug crimes as white Americans. And so, there are issues going on there.
And that jumps right into our next story. I'm going to jump to a little stat here near the middle of the story that I found fairly compelling.
Yeah, go ahead.
The USSC,
which is the United States Sentencing Commission,
thank you, found that career offenders who account for 11% of the federal prison population are sentenced to long terms of incarceration, receiving an average sentence of more than 12 years, which is 147 months. Most career offenders, 74% in fiscal year 2014, are serving time for drug trafficking. 74% are serving time for drug trafficking. Now, they didn't...
And drug trafficking doesn't necessarily mean, you're hauling 1,000 pounds on the backs of, what did Steve King say, Mexicans with calves the size of cantaloupes. No, it doesn't mean that you've... Trafficking is supposed to mean, depending on the substance, over 100 pounds, over 1,000 pounds, but, they use it as a loose catch-all for that. But when you look at some of the differences between cannabis terms versus others, it's just staggering. And we had this here. Over here, and this fellow that we're talking about in this story is a guy named Paul Fields, and not for anything, he does happen to be white, and the first time he was sentenced for a marijuana offense, he got probation. The second time he got 100 days in jail. Now the third time he got more than 15 years in prison. And you might say, well, why would this guy be doing this and that and everything? But this guy is a typical hippie deadhead sort of person.
He did have a lot of grass for sure.
He did, but yeah, he did. Okay, but
256 plants.
But it's not hard to get there. If you have a couple of cloning trays with clones that you're trying to get rooted, that can be 100
they did
right
not specific
there.
that they were 200 mature plants
right.
or anything like that.
Right.
I understand, like, we're the guys from Tennessee. Yeah, they're a fairly conservative state, even though before Colorado and Washington legalized, I heard a statistic that Tennessee was the state that grew the second most cannabis in the country, right behind California.
Yeah.
Now, I'm sure that's not true anymore. They probably fall into 10th or 11th, but still, they have quite the cannabis culture out in that state, so I hear.
But what we're finding out in this article, it says that he ended up with a 188-month sentence for growing marijuana, and that sentence is substantially longer than the average federal sentence for sexual abuse, which is 134 months in fiscal year 2015, robbery on a federal level, 78 months, arson, 62 months, manslaughter, 54 months.
Yeah, absolutely true. My grandfather was assaulted a year ago this week by a gentleman, a scumbag, who makes his business to assault elderly people. He had recently been released on from charges of assaulting another elderly person before he was caught up in this. He's a career criminal. He's a violent criminal, and he was given 2 to 6 on a plea deal. This guy assaulting 90-year-old World War II veterans is looked upon more favorably in our society than growing cannabis.
It's
doing
amazing.
it over and over and victimizing the people who are really those in need of the greatest protection.
And the thing is, there was no allegation in the story that he had sold any of it. You know, was he generous when he went to the Dead concerts? Yeah, he was. But, you know, that's generosity. And it's irrelevant whether he sold it or not, even though, as I said, there was no indication that he did sell it. It's irrelevant to the fact that this guy is doing something nonviolent that is not affecting the community at large, and gets a sentence that is, on average, 3 times longer than the situation you're describing, people who are going out and preying on the elderly or otherwise disabled.
No victim, no crime, right?
Yeah. Well, that's what we would hope. But the United States position is that we are all the victim when somebody smokes a joint or plants a seed.
Is that so? Well, then why does the federal government distribute 300 marijuana joints to, what, 5 or 6 pre-existing patients?
There are 4 of them left alive in the new investigational drug program that started off in the Carter administration and then was eventually sealed off in the George H.W. Papa Bush or Poppy Bush. They stopped taking applications to new patients, but there are still 4 of them alive. And you're right, they get 300 grams a month from the federal government. And not only that,
for free, free of charge.
For free. Not only that, but the federal government has patented 3 cannabinoids as neuroprotectants. So, you know.
So should the attorney generals of these various states be suing the federal government for endangering the citizenry of their states by promoting this dangerous drug on their streets and allowing them to consume it recreationally in plain view?
I'm not going to hold my breath on that.
I mean, what are they? How can they allow this injustice to go on? What kind of society do we live in if we can have it on one hand and not the other? Where does that rule of law take place then?
You got me. You've just got
nonsense.
You've just got so many people who have so much invested in prohibition that it's you know, taking the weight of a majority of people getting out there and voting and being active and to overcome this inertia and this protectionism of the prohibitionist industry. It's difficult, but we are coming around.
Look at this. And the very last sentence in the article is the most telling to me. Arrested in 2009, Mr. Fields went to prison in 2010. Now in his early 50s, he has served 6.5 years and has not seen his 7-year-old daughter outside of a prison visitor's room since she was a baby. The only way that this child has had any interaction with her parent is through the looking glass, seeing him in a prisoner's outfit because of this policy. Unbelievable. You know, it's not just the victims are the people. The victims are the families.
The victims are the families, without a doubt. Without a doubt. With that, we're going to take another break and be right back.
Getting Legal offers an informative and simple way for you to get your marijuana card. Why come to Getting Legal to get your marijuana card? We have a 99% approval rating and the lowest price in town. Avoid legal problems. Getting Legal can get you legal fast. Ready for a new start? Come in now and get relief from your chronic conditions affecting your quality of life. Call Getting Legal today at 702-979-9999. That's 702-979-9999 or visit our website at gettinglegal.com to get your marijuana card today.
Attention medical marijuana patients. Did you know that your medicine could contain pesticides, heavy metals, and even mold? Are you really sure that you're getting the same potency every single time? Well, the answer to that question is simple. DigiPath Labs. DigiPath Labs is a state-approved laboratory run by scientists. So look for the DigiPath Labs quality seal on your next medicine and on the door of your favorite dispensary. To learn more, go to digipathlabs.com. That's DIGIPATH labs.com.
Hi, I'm Armin Yamanijan, CEO of Essence Dispensaries, and I'd like to let you know a little bit about our company. As a completely complimentary service, our on-site nurse is here to meet with any patient or non-patient to discuss dosing and best practices. We have 3 convenient locations. We have one location on Tropicana between Decatur and Jones, which is our west side location. Our Henderson location is on the corner of Sunset and Green Valley Parkway, and we're proud to announce that we have the first and only dispensary on the Las Vegas Strip, on the corner of Las Vegas Boulevard and Sahara. Our prices are the lowest prices in town and the highest quality medicine. Please come and see us at one of our 3 convenient locations or visit us at essencevegas.com. You can also call us at 702-978-7575. Once again, the number is 702-978-7575.
Welcome back to the Nevada Cannabis News Hour. This is your host, Mike McAuliffe, with my co-host, Perry Haichu, in studio. And we're just discussing various issues of interest and issues of outrage for people who are in this community and are looking to see justice done. You know, Congress in the First Amendment, or the First Amendment of the Constitution, said Congress shall make no law restricting blah 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 freedom of religion and shall not establish a religion. And in its very first treaty with the Barbary Pirates, the United States said, we are not a Christian nation, we are a secular nation. And, you know, over the past 20, 30 years, though, you have the conservative Christian movement saying, oh, no, this is a Christian country, and making all sorts of litmus tests for that. You know, but it's whether it is or whether it's not. If you know, Episcopalians shouldn't be going to war with Methodists or Pentecostals or
I'll leave their
Presbyterians
religious bickering to the religious.
Yeah, you know, but when you have people challenging it on a different level, it's amazing the kickback there is from the government. Now, in this case, Rhode Island State Police arrested a couple of people, 46-year-old Alan Gordon and 56-year-old Ann Armstrong. And we get this from the Daily Beast, by the way, Abby Haglage. And so they've arrested these 2 people. And when they did a search of their premises, they uncovered 12 pounds of cannabis, 10 pounds of hash oil, and 57 marijuana plants. Wow, 10 pounds of hash oil. 10 pounds of hash oil.
oil.
That's a lot of hash oil.
Oh my!
Nonetheless, 57 plants. One, as we were discussing in the earlier segment, about 250 some plants. 57 is not necessarily that large of a garden, and so but the police, of course, described it as a large marijuana cultivation operation. Well, that doesn't surprise me.
Here we go. Charged with intent to manufacture and deliver.
Yep, possession with intent, standard charge and something like this. And then they were shuffled off to jail and held there for 2 weeks. Now, now they're prepping to represent themselves on a potentially historic case. Yeah, on a potentially historic case, representing themselves. Yeah, you're right. Bad idea. And they're going to argue that the Religious Freedom Restoration Act protects their freedom to grow and use cannabis. And, they'll have to convince a judge that the Controlled Substances Act places an undue burden on their religious freedom. And, I agree with them there, but I think it's going to be tough to convince a judge.
Oh, sure. I believe that the Founding Fathers had that legislative intent very clear, like you said, not only in our original founding documents, but in the various treaties we've signed and the policies we've enacted over the years. Even Thomas Jefferson himself wrote an amended Bible that took, or an amended New Testament,
yes,
that took out basically all the miracles and all the magic nonsense and things like that, and just basically left the teachings, and it was like the abridged gospel of Jesus Christ or something like that. Even him, because a lot of people like to liken the Founding Fathers to the 12 apostles. They were like one and the same, you know what I mean? These guys were all these pious saint-like people, and that's just really not true. They were independent, they were free thinkers, and they often argued very violently about where the direction of this country was supposed to go. I mean, John Adams and Thomas Jefferson were good friends who became bitter enemies.
And had a feud that lasted decades.
Absolutely, over things of this nature. Not directly of this nature, we're talking about cannabis, but religious freedom. Where should we draw that line? Where are we a Christian nation or not? And even some of our wisest founders were aware that religion should be respected, but not influential in our policy
Not
making.
an integral part of the government.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And in this case, you know, this Ann Armstrong, who describes herself as a hippie with a cause, she's determined to win. And she says, my religion is cannabis. I've been accused of that. And I don't exactly buy that, though. You know, cannabis can be a component of her religion, I think. But she says they're not carding people coming up to get wine if they're not 21. And she's talking about it in the church when you go up to receive communion. So they're saying
Kids
that the state or the government is not putting a prohibition on kids under 21 getting.
That's different because it's Jesus.
It's Jesus' blood. Yes, I know. And so why on earth, she says, would they interfere with our adult communion of God when it's proven to be safe? And her statement makes the central argument of their case and says that the main belief of the healing church that cannabis is the giver of life. And they claim that the recipe outlined in Exodus 30:23 for the oft-cited holy anointing oil contains cannabis. And I've done some research on this over the years, and it comes from the ancient Hebrew word of cannabasum, which are alternate depending on who you talk to. The ancient Talmudic scholars say that it was cannabis. Other people who are on the prohibition side, no, so they say it's a sweet cane reed that grew in the area.
There are 30 different interpretations of the Bible: New American Standard, New International Version, King James Version. You know, I could go on and on and on, and different churches read from different things. And when you change these wording around, even though it says in Revelation, if you change this word, I will strike you down, they choose to do it anyway. And you know,
they haven't been struck down.
Yeah, well, you know, that's because it's all BS.
But what these people, they're claiming that cannabis is the tree of life, is referred to in the Old Testament, and in the New as well. And St. John prophesied the tree of life would one day grow in cities with glass streets and glowing multicolored gems. And they write that this sounds surprisingly like an ancient mystic's frantic attempt to describe his vision of a future greenhouse supplemented by LED grow lights. Era before glass windows existed, you know, and
sure,
you know,
I'll go with it.
Yeah. You know, the thing is that they've decided to challenge the legality of this, and they're building on a case from last year that is still in the courts from Indiana, the first church of cannabis, where its founder Bill Levin said that his cannabis use is based on the RFRA, and that there's a version of it in 21 states, and the law itself dates back to '93. But what's happening is when that law was brought into being, it was because of Native Americans who were using peyote.
I remember hearing about this.
And the argument that the government, the prohibitionists, are making is that yes, but this was hundreds of thousands of Native Americans who've been using this for centuries, and it's central to their religion, so that they need to have this. And you know that because in these individual churches you just got a couple of handfuls of people, that it should not be accorded the same weight of law.
Well, no, the Mormons had to fight a war in order to get basically, you know what I mean, their freedom. I mean, people act like they're this passive group, but if you look at their history, they've been very warlike. They had to fight all the way out here just to find their own religious freedom from our religiously tolerant government, because people didn't like what they had to say. I mean, I'm not suggesting that marijuana users should go up in arms and form our own promised land or something, but I am saying that if you think they're just that the powers that be will respect your rights just because you think they're your rights, you got another thing coming. You're going to have to fight for them. And I wish these people the best. I really do. I'll be interested to see how it comes out. But a hippie with a cause defending herself in a federal court, I mean, I don't
sound promising.
No, definitely not.
You know, but the point here is, I think is that should be made is that they're saying that it's okay because, you know, Native Americans were using it by hundreds of thousands,
once
and
again,
this
tradition.
handful of people, right? Well, yeah, once again, tradition. But I would point out then that Jesus started out with 12 apostles. And, you know, since then, the Catholic and Protestant churches have grown to over 1 billion people.
Well, and they were also mercilessly slaughtered and tortured and persecuted for, God knows how long until they were able to find their own.
It's because the Romans weren't smoking enough pot and didn't get mellow.
Yeah, no doubt.
You know.
No
So
doubt.
anyway, this is something that's interesting that we will follow. The first person to challenge this was Roger Christie out in Hawaii. Pardon me. At the opening days of this century, and he got slammed by the federal government, and he tried to use this defense, and they didn't want to hear it, and so he's still sitting in jail someplace. So we're gonna see where this goes. Anyway, that's about all the time that we have. We are moving forward with our Patients First meeting, which takes place at the Source Dispensary on Rainbow and Sahara. That's going to be Saturday at 2 o'clock.
Yes.
You go on to the Weekend Facebook page or our website and take a look. We have pool parties coming up. We have any number of events, and we are going to be gearing up with politicians for this election season. And as we try to say every show, it's really important. Get out there and get registered, because if you're not a registered voter, the politicians really don't care about you.
It's like they say, the reason why change doesn't happen is because you're not registered to vote, and you won't make the change. You got to do what you can. All right. Well, thank you so much for spending your afternoon with us again, and we hope to see you again next week. And this is for Weekend. This is Mike McAuliffe and Perry Heichu signing off.
Stay safe.